large number attending the conference of the Digital Forensic Center, where we will speak about the presence and influence of China in Southeast Europe, with particular emphasis on Montenegro. On behalf of the Atlantic Council of Montenegro, we'll first hear from Ms. Jurisic, and after that we'll hear from Mr. Chris Carver, Deputy Chief of Mission in the U.S. Embassy to Montenegro. We wish to extend our gratitude to the U.S. Embassy and the State Department for the support in the organization of DFC and this activity. And then Milan Jovanovic and Marko Banovic will present the results of the study that took several months to produce, which they managed to summarize in the document that you have in front of you. So I first invite Ms. Pejanovic-Jurisic to take the floor. Good day. It is truly a pleasure to see that you accepted our invitation to come, as we wish to share with you the results of work of the Digital Forensic Center and the Atlantic Council in the past few months. All of you know that the mission of the Atlantic Council of Montenegro includes organization and coordination of scientific and research activities in the field of defense and security, as well as diplomacy. Digital Forensic Center and the three centers that the Council has represent a platform that, through its projects and analysis of political processes, tends to organize dialogue on key international developments and processes in the Atlantic region. That is particularly in the Southeast Europe region. I believe all of you have seen our last document regarding this new initiative, Open Balkan, where in the Alliance, or in the Council, we also felt that we need to give an overview of reasons or pros and cons when it comes to the strategic developments and views in general in Montenegro. We hope that this will be useful to the decision makers when making important, relevant decisions on the side of Montenegro. These are times in which geopolitics are the most important topic in all of the analysis and in all of the discussions, mostly due to the fact that we have war in the European continent with all of its consequences, not only in the area of security, but also in the field of economics, related to the increasing inflation that is omnipresent and developments that might or will definitely lead us into global recession. After several decades of progress, mostly affected by globalization, the focus is shifting in the opposite direction, questioning the liberal international order and with the increase of populist anti-establishment narratives. But still, even with such a perspective, it's clear that geostrategic relations are the reason for our greatest concern, having in mind the Russian aggression against Ukraine and a significant level of uncertainty when it comes to ways to overcome the situation, which is seen as a catalyst of transition when it comes to the global order and the basics of international law. We have questions such as what could be realistically a stable and sustainable way out of these developments. What will be the relations established in the already multi-center distribution of forces globally? Whether the technopolar awareness will lead to new forms of management based on digital globalization. A particularly important element in this context is the foreign policy positioning of the People's Republic of China, characterized by a clear ambition to become a global power, number one, that through historic process of having a youthful nation actually will again regain the power that it had in the past. This speaks about culturally and technologically developed, internationally respected society, supported by the arguments of large populations, several millions long history, the nuclear power, and a permanent member in the Security Council of the United Nations. The Chinese interests vary from ensuring economic prosperity, shift towards the West that Beijing is doing through the different projects, and they also wish to see Chinese influence even on the US. Essentially, these are the attempts to change the global order based on the concept of liberal democracy towards the direction of adaptation to the Chinese strategic interests and goals. These are the reasons to identify the fact that the global transport of China is a serious threat to the US, the EU, and a whole set of governments internationally, because it does not share the same values, which is particularly seen when it comes to violations of human rights and freedoms. Additionally, the war in Ukraine tested the strength, but also the limitations of the Chinese partnership based on the interests of the strategically autonomous powers. Although both of these countries, Russia and China, are opposing the system based on the Western liberal values, their foreign policy coordination is still limited with different views of the global order. While Beijing is in support of a changed yet stable international system, Moscow obviously prefers disorder, all the way to aggression, uncertainty, causing distrust, and violating the unities and alliances. China is a revisionist force, but not a revolutionary one in terms of wanting to dismantle the international order. Still, numerous questions here that draw the attention of the experts, but also the lay public, and the Russian-Chinese partnership in the conditions of the war in Ukraine, the situation in the Chinese economy that can dominantly affect the pace of the global recession, and then the policy with regard to COVID, and then very complex relations between China and the US, not only when it comes to Taiwan. The fundamentals of Chinese influence in Europe, particularly in the Balkans, are the initiative Belt and Road, and apart from the economic, China is trying to strengthen its presence in Europe through political and cultural cooperation with the European countries. This proved to be very effective, particularly in the Western Balkans. Lack of development, underdeveloped infrastructure, lack of democratic capacity also, but reservation and insufficient presence of the EU and the US allowed China to position itself as an important factor and partner in the Balkans. Thus, Montenegro in recent years was the center of numerous political and academic debates in which possibilities and risks of cooperation with China are being discussed, and particularly topical are the issues regarding repayment of the Chinese loan for construction of the highway. The approach of China resulted to development of relations in the field of infrastructure, energy, and culture, all with the aim to promote Chinese narratives and interests. In the situation where the international addresses are considering the presence of China in the light of its positioning in the global scene and the recomposition of the global balance of powers that will definitely result after the end of the war in Ukraine, in the Atlantic Council, we thought it was useful to map the China's influence in the region and Montenegro in a timely manner, and that this is important in order to identify potential economic as well as political and security implications. The study produced by the DFC that maps this influence that we will present today is aimed at improving the understanding of the influence of China in this region, and its integral part are the recommendations that can be useful to the national and international decision makers in order to avoid the consequences that are not complementary with the strategic interests and proclaimed goals of Montenegro. With regard to implementation of adequate development policies based on standards and the acquis of the EU, as well as the rules and policies of the EU and the NATO alliance. I invite now Mr. Chris Carter, who is the Deputy Chief of Mission in the US Embassy to Montenegro to tell us from his point of view what are the interests of our strategic partner regarding this topic that we wish to discuss today.
Well, thank you. It's nice to see a lot of friends, colleagues, friendly faces in the audience today. Thank you all for coming here today to participate in this event. I'm really pleased to join you all. This is a timely event. First of all, a big thank you to the team at the DFC for bringing us together today. I'm looking forward to hearing about the team's research into China's influence in Montenegro. Excuse me for a second. So all of us recognize that we're stronger when we work together, especially when our partnerships are built on shared values and a common vision. I know all of us here share a vision that includes a commitment to democracy, rule of law, a respect for human rights, inclusive economic opportunity, and the pursuit of transatlantic prosperity and security. But unfortunately, right now, the very foundations of the international order are under serious and sustained challenge. One stark example is Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. President Putin's war of choice is having a devastating effect, not just on the innocent people of that country, but also on Europe, the United States, and on countries across the world, including Montenegro. This war has shocked our sensibilities. Its reverberations are being felt clearly throughout the Western Balkans as refugees seek shelter in the region, as disinformation fills the media, and as economies begin to reel from shockwaves caused by the major disruptions in energy, food, and tourist flows. And while the war is not over, President Putin has failed to achieve a single one of his strategic aims. Instead of erasing Ukraine's independence, he has strengthened it. Instead of dividing NATO, he's united it. Instead of asserting Russia's strength, he's undermined it. And instead of weakening the international order, he has brought our countries together to defend it. But even as President Putin's war continues, I believe we must remain focused on the most serious long-term threat to the international order. And that's the challenge posed by the People's Republic of China, the PRC. China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do so. China is also integral to the global economy and to our ability to solve challenges from climate to COVID. Put simply, the PRC is a strategic rival and competitor. That's why this is one of the most complex and consequential relationships of any that we have in the world today. We see that clearly through China's activities and influence across the region and in Montenegro itself. China is a global power with extraordinary reach, influence, and ambition. It's the second largest economy with world-class cities and public transportation networks. It's home to some of the world's largest tech companies, and it seeks to dominate the technologies and industries of the future. It's rapidly modernizing its military and intends to become a top-tier fighting force with global reach. China's transformation is due to the talent, the ingenuity, and the hard work of the Chinese people. But make no mistake, it was also made possible by the stability and the opportunity that the international order provides. Arguably, no country on earth has benefited more from this international order than China. But rather than using its power to reinforce and revitalize the laws, the agreements and the principles, and the institutions that enabled its success so that other countries can benefit from them too, Beijing is undermining them. We see that in how Beijing has perfected mass surveillance within China and exported that technology to more than 80 countries. How it's advancing unlawful maritime claims in the South China Sea, thereby undermining freedom of navigation and commerce. How it's circumventing or breaking trade rules, harming workers and companies in the United States and around the world, and how it purports to champion sovereignty and territorial integrity while standing with governments that brazenly violate them. Here in Montenegro, the interest of PRC companies in Montenegro's critical infrastructure and technologies is high, and they are directly or indirectly involved with some of the country's most important infrastructure projects. The construction of the first section of the Bar-Bolyari Highway and the ecological reconstruction of the Plevnia thermal plant that produces over 40% of this country's electricity are but two examples. PRC companies are also interested in the 5G network development through their partnerships with local telecom companies, posing a threat to privacy and security in Montenegro's telecom sector. Montenegro has shown itself to be a committed NATO ally that recognizes the importance of protecting its critical infrastructure and strategic assets. And as Montenegro seeks to attract foreign investment, we must keep in mind that its open investment climate, economic vulnerability to external shocks, and sizable debt to China will pose significant risks. The story is similar across the region. Even as countries in the Western Balkans recognize the United States as a trusted and reliable partner, the PRC has become a prominent actor and has established itself through numerous Belt and Road Initiative projects and investments, offering large state-guaranteed loans for energy and transportation projects. In 2021, for example, PRC linked Costco increased its ownership stake to 67% of Greece's busiest port and continues to pursue acquisitions of critical infrastructure. PRC-linked companies such as Huawei, ZTE, and others are aggressively pursuing tenders in the telecom and security sectors, such as on safe cities and on airport security. I should note that Huawei also has a large presence in 2 of the 3 mobile providers here in Montenegro. Serbia remains the PRC's closest partner in the Western Balkans, showcasing the bilateral friendship of steel, strengthened by Beijing's extensive investments in infrastructure and expanding cultural and security ties. The PRC is also fostering relationships with Western Balkan countries on culture, media, and politics. These efforts to gain traction, especially as the EU accession process lingers on and leaves the door open for China to expand its influence and footprint in the region. As one of the region's most important sources of foreign direct investment, many countries are reluctant to alienate China. They balk when pressed to join U.S. or European-led efforts to call out the PRC's problematic behavior. That's why I'd like to take this opportunity to commend Montenegro for standing with its international partners to call out the dire state of human rights in China. For example, last year, Montenegro signed on to the October 2021 UN Human Rights Council joint statement condemning the PRC's human rights violations. And then just last week, at the 50th session of the UN Human Rights Council, they joined 47 nations to endorse a Dutch statement expressing grave concerns about the human rights situation in China, especially in Xinjiang. Against this backdrop, and even while Russia was clearly mobilizing to invade Ukraine, President Xi and President Putin declared that the friendship between their countries was, and I quote, without limits. Just a few weeks ago, the 2 countries conducted a strategic bomber patrol together. Beijing's defense of President Putin's wars should raise alarm bells for all of us. As Secretary Blinken said recently when describing U.S. strategy and policy on the PRC, it is clear that we cannot rely on Beijing to change trajectory. Instead, we must together shape the strategic environment around Beijing to advance our vision for an open, inclusive international system. The actions that we take both in the U.S. and here in Montenegro will determine whether our shared vision of the future will be realized. I can assure you that the United States will continue to invest in the foundations of our strength, our competitiveness, our innovation, our democracy. We will align our efforts with our network of allies and partners like Montenegro, acting with common purpose and in common cause to build our vision for the future. As the Secretary said, and I quote, "These actions are all aimed at defending, and as necessary, reforming the rules-based order that benefits all nations. We want to lead a race to the top on tech, on climate, on infrastructure, on global health, and on inclusive economic growth. And we want to strengthen a system in which as many countries as possible can come together to cooperate effectively, resolve differences peacefully, and write their own future as sovereign equals. We know that many countries, including the United States, have vital economic or people-to-people ties with China that they want to preserve. This is not about forcing countries to choose. It's about giving them a choice so that the only option isn't an opaque investment that leaves countries in debt, that strokes corruption, harms the environment, that fails to create local jobs or growth, and compromises countries' exercise of their sovereignty. We've heard firsthand about the buyer's remorse that these deals can leave behind. I am confident that we are well positioned to outpace China in key areas. Beijing wants to put itself at the center of global innovation and manufacturing, increase other countries' technological dependence, and then use the dependence to impose its foreign policy preferences. And Beijing is going to great lengths to win this contest. For example, taking advantage of the openness of our economies to spy, to hack, to steal, to take technology and know-how, to advance its military innovation and entrench its surveillance state. In response, we're sharpening our tools to safeguard our technological competitiveness. As the Biden administration has laid out, that includes new and stronger export controls to make sure our critical innovations don't end up in the wrong hands. It includes greater protections for academic research to create an open, secure, and supportive environment for science. It includes better cyber defenses, stronger security for sensitive data, and sharper investment screening mechanisms to defend companies and countries against Beijing's efforts to gain access to sensitive technologies, data, or critical infrastructure. Make no mistake, the scale and scope of the challenge posed by the People's Republic of China will test American diplomacy like nothing ever before. For countries like Montenegro that are committed to building an open, secure, and prosperous future, the United States will continue to work in common cause to uphold the principles that make our shared progress possible and stand up for the right of every nation to write its own future. Allow me to quote Secretary Blinken one last time. Our message to the people of China is, we'll compete with confidence, we'll cooperate wherever we can, and we'll contest where we must. There's no reason why our great nations cannot coexist peacefully and share in and contribute together to human progress. Thank you.
Koristim priliku da se zahvalim.
I take this opportunity to thank Professor Đurišić and Mr. Chris Garber for excellent insights from the aspect of Montenegro and the US now. And now I invite colleagues Milan Jovanović and Marko Banović to join us and to share with you the key findings of the study that they've been working on for a few months. Thank you.
Test radi. Poštovane.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me on behalf of the DFC team and the Atlantic Council to thank you for finding the time and for giving the attention to this topic today, and I hope we'll discuss this important topic together with you today. Colleague Marko Banović and I will present in the next 20 to 30 minutes some of the most important segments of the study, but I would recommend to all of you who are interested in details regarding influence of China in Montenegro, please feel free to take the copy of the study. You can find it even on our webpage today. So I give the floor to Marko immediately. He will start our presentation. Good day to you all. I wish to thank you for finding the time to join us today. When it comes to the study itself and the reason why we decided to present the results of our several months long survey today, first of all, Professor Juric spoke about that, the importance of this situation, the geopolitical developments in the world and the position of China and all that. So I think it's very important to define the influence of China in Southeast Europe now, including influence on Montenegro. So the study itself is a comprehensive analysis of the influence of China in Southeast Europe with key focus on Montenegro. When it comes to the professional public, there are dilemmas about the goals and intentions of China towards Europe and Southeast Europe in particular, not only economically but also from the aspect of long-term political goals and intentions. Presence of Beijing in the region involves development of relations at various levels. China has used the space created to some extent by the fact that countries in the West are occupied with their own problems and managed to get involved in the key sectors, primarily through infrastructure and energy sectors. It influences now the Southeast Europe and the Western Balkans. We've also mentioned the war in Ukraine, which will definitely affect the future relations between China and Europe and Southeast Europe, but also with the US. And in this respect, we should also look into the EU integration process, not only on the side of Montenegro, but the overall Balkans region, which will develop further or define further a relationship of the EU towards China, because we see that Serbia, as the biggest country in the region, is strengthening its relations with China, and we should see whether after the developments in Ukraine this will speed up or actually delay the EU integration process. When it comes to China and international political relations, in order to understand the foreign policy positioning of China in the modern international relations, we should know that it's based on the geopolitical dimension of its historical experience and its long-term strategic goals, which do not depend on the programs of individual leaders. When it comes to these three long-term goals in the Chinese policy, one is sovereignty and territorial integrity, then economic development, and international status and image. We should also look into the state organization, the one-party system in China, and the combination between communist ideology and capitalist business undertakings. In the strategic document, they present all of the strategic geopolitical goals of China. I would mention there the resolution of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China, but we should also mention global and regional initiatives through which China implements its policy, international policy. This is primarily global initiative Belt and Road as a form of revitalization of the Road of Silk, but we should also mention the regional initiative 16+1, which is very productive for China, particularly in the region of the Western Balkans. Besides, we should not neglect the other aspects of Chinese power, because apart from the economic influence, which is already identified in the world, China is using skillfully diplomacy also. They have a very active diplomatic network, and we should not neglect the aspect of cultural influence of China through the Confucius Institute and cooperation with the educational institutions, but we also have presence of the Chinese media, which is increasing in Europe. In order to understand the positioning of China in Southeast Europe, we should look into its relations with the global powers, primarily the US and the EU. As already mentioned, China is trying to reshape the existing global order based on the liberal values, and it wants to create an order in which it will be the leader, which will be adapted to the Chinese national interests and strategic goals. When it comes to the relationship between China and the US, this is a very burdened relationship, although there are spheres of cooperation between these two great powers, primarily in the field of trade, investments, technology, and education. However, the issue of Taiwan and the conflicts in the South Chinese Sea are the key burdening issues. We should also mention the tensions that are increasing during the COVID-19 pandemic and the mutual accusations regarding outburst of the pandemic. With regard to the EU, the relationship between China and the EU has strengthened after China joined the World Trade Organization. However, from a strategic partner to the EU, China now transformed into a systemic competitor that is trying to take over supremacy in Europe. What's problematic for the EU is exactly these large investments within the EU, which are marked by lack of transparency and actually result in the offset of the democratic values in the EU countries. When it comes to the Balkan Peninsula or the Southeast Europe region, it's very important for China and the achievement of its strategic goals. Stronger presence in this region opens the door for further influence of China in the central part of Europe and towards the west. So Balkans are important for China in facing the interests regarding the US. Due to the lack of democratic capacity and underdeveloped infrastructure, China now has a stronger impact in this region, and it's easier for it to achieve its geopolitical goals. As for this region, China mostly uses the multilateral platform 16+1. It's multilateral, but it's interesting that China is concluding bilateral agreements with the member states. This is mostly economic cooperation involved in the platform, but apart from the economic influence, China is using increasingly culture, educational institutions, and media to promote and spread its soft powers. When it comes to China and Chinese companies, they don't have ownership over media outlets in Southeast Europe. However, Chinese media have memorandum of cooperation signed with almost all of the media outlets in the countries of the Western Balkans. Apart from the media, China is also skillfully using disinformation and the social networks. We could best see the proof of that during the COVID-19 pandemic. China was very active in the social networks, trying to improve the image that was created when it was blamed for the outburst of the pandemic. We should also mention that Greece was one of the first targets of the Chinese influence. This is a country where China first entered, primarily due to the economic crisis there, but also because of the slow movement of the EU. This opened the door to it to present itself as a savior, to be someone who will encourage further development in the region. We should mention here primarily Chinese influence of 64% of control over the Piraeus port through the company COSCO Shipping in Slovenia. The port of Koper is the biggest container terminal in the Balkans and the second biggest one in the Mediterranean. This port allows China access to achieve access to the market of the Central Europe and further towards the west. Port of Koper became part of the initiative Belt and Road in 2017, I think. No, 2018. It also, China is also present through FDIs in terms of license and also purchase of the, well, when it comes to, I mentioned Gorenje Outfit 7, these are big FDIs of China and Slovenia. When it comes to Croatia, there are also important infrastructure projects, the construction of the Pelješac Bridge, which was financed by the EU with 70% of the cost of construction. However, in the tender, it was CBRC that won, actually. They are building the highway in Europe. This is how China works. It appears in tenders with the best bids. In this case, China offered that it would end the construction of the bridge 6 months earlier, with 500,000 Croatian kuna saved in terms of the lower offer as compared to the US and the EU bidders. As for Romania, this is the example where the influence of China is best seen. It shows how far it goes, meaning that in the appearance of the EU and its influence, we see that China has its limitations. Romanian authorities are now reviewing the influence of China in the country, and they cancel the contract for the construction of the nuclear power plant in Romania. We should also mention the influence of the EU and the US in limiting China and its soft powers, primarily with regard to technology and the development of the 5G network in Southeast Europe, which has weakened significantly the influence of China in this region.
Moving on to Western Balkan countries, countries closer to us and countries bordering Montenegro. We must underline and actually raise the issue of cooperation between China and Serbia. China chose Serbia as the biggest and most influential former Yugoslav republics, in addition to the economic sector heavily influenced by China. They also cooperate in the sphere of loans, culture, education, and security. We could see this just recently when the war in Ukraine started. Serbia procured weapons from China. What's missing for China, perhaps in the countries that are EU member states in Southeast Europe, is this political affiliation and some sort of media support. That's exactly what Belgrade made possible for China. In the last decade in Serbia, we identified at least 61 projects in different stages of implementation, funded or implemented by Chinese entities. 18.7 billion euro is the minimum value of projects. As for the projects themselves, they are everything but transparent. We were able to see this in the case of infrastructure projects, including roads and factories. Also, workers from China and Vietnam were exploited in Serbia. Also, what's problematic is the willingness of Serbia to change their legislation to make them favorable to Chinese investors, the law on special procedures and the law on labor law primarily. President Vučić announced that by the end of 2022 they will sign an agreement on international trade between Serbia and the People's Republic of China. There are other aspects in which we can see how much China has been active. Technology, for instance, Serbia has been deepening its cooperation with Huawei, despite the fact that in 2020, under the Washington agreement, it undertook to limit the influence of this company and not to allow them presence in the 5G network. Also, they intensified institutional cooperation in the media sector between these two countries. Apart from that, they also cooperate in education and culture. Primarily, we refer to the Confucius Institutes in Belgrade and Novi Sad, and just recently the Chinese Cultural Center was opened in Belgrade. According to some research, the 70% of Serbian citizens believe that China and Russia are the main economic partners, but also political partners of Serbia. In addition to this, we've seen the drop in the percentage of citizens who support EU membership of Serbia. It shows us how successful Chinese campaigns have been in Serbia. I will just give you an example. What we found on Twitter in 2020 when we were analyzing the events on this social media. The analyzed period was between March and April. We analyzed 30,000 tweets. 21,572 of them came from fake bot accounts. Accounts glorifying the friendship between China and Serbia and the assistance that China provided to Serbia in combating COVID-19. Also, these accounts, these profiles were glorifying the President Vučić and Prime Minister Brnabić. But what's key here is that they created the narrative that EU did not provide assistance to Serbia, and that this partnership is not a genuine one like the one with China. The most frequent hashtags were Serbia, Vučić, and China, and the most mentioned tagged profiles were those of President, Prime Minister, and Chinese embassy. The most quoted sources were the media outlets that are close to the government in Serbia, Informer, Pink, and Kurir. We had to mention the influence of China in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In addition to Serbia, this is the country in which China has the biggest influence in the Western Balkans. 29 Chinese projects were identified, the value of which exceeded 5 billion euro. A large number of Chinese projects have been implemented in the Republic of Srpska in the sector of energy and transport. The same applies to these projects, just like in the case of Serbia. These are non-transparent projects, involving corrupt activities, but also negative environmental impact. And it's not a surprise, actually, that this happens, because everything that happens in Serbia has a spillover effect on the Republic of Srpska. Also, the leader of the Republic of Srpska, Mr. Dodik, does not hide the fact that he prefers China and Russia to the EU and the US. We should also say that China exerts the same kind of influence in Albania and North Macedonia. Primarily, they are active in implementing infrastructure projects and energy investments, but there's been a decrease in the investments in Albania. They tend to leave, the investors tend to leave, seem to be leaving Albania. Also, they've been constructing the highway in North Macedonia, and China has been providing donations to combat COVID-19. And that's it as far as a global and regional influence of China is concerned. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Milan to share with you information about China's influence in Montenegro. Well, generally, when China and Montenegro are concerned, we could say that China's presence in the territory of Montenegro is relatively new and somehow is encouraged by the alienation of both the EU and the US from the Western Balkans, because of a set of internal problems, but also because of the financial crisis in 2008. That's when Beijing used this geopolitical vacuum, if you could call it that way, in the Western Balkans because of the priorities of our partners simply shifted. And we could say that they rightly assessed that they could be investing in some important sectors in both Montenegro and the region. And as my colleague already said, the relations between China and Montenegro have not changed, are not different substantially compared to other countries in the region. And here we see infrastructure, energy, culture, that these are the sectors in which cooperation is developed, all in order to promote Chinese interests and Chinese narratives. This issue, became topical with the project of constructing highway, and we've been discussing the potential implications of this arrangement in Montenegro. However, in March in 2010, the issue of Chinese presence and its consequences was raised by the then DPM, 2020, and the DPM, when he asked the EU to help with repaying the law. Also, the Brussels said that they had no mechanisms regarding to help with that. They did express their concern with respect to the implications of Chinese business arrangements in the region. And another concern was raised that Montenegro could become yet another victim of the Chinese debt bondage diplomacy.
When it comes to the views of the public, China is seen as a powerful yet well-intentional global power. This is based on the media reporting about China, but also its non-aggressive public presence, always emphasizing that China does not have any intention to interfere with the internal political issues in Montenegro. Relations between China and Montenegro or any other country in the Western Balkans are not based on common cultural or identity type of connections. Still, according to International Republican Institute survey of last year, citizens of Montenegro, 43% of them have a positive view of China. They don't see it as a threat to their own country. Specifically speaking about the media, for the needs of this survey, we've engaged in monitoring of the Montenegrin media for the period 2019, 2020, and 2021. We wanted to see how they reported about China. What we could see is that, the methodology was, as there were too many articles, we wanted to take the key segments on economics, security, the highway, and so on, and actually politics and society. And the monitoring showed that Montenegrin media mostly take over texts regarding China. There were never authored texts or original texts on this topic. They mostly wrote about coronavirus in 2020 and 2021, but also geopolitics, the highway, economics, and sports. Speaking about the highway, it's clear to all that this is the basis of the Chinese-Montenegrin relations, and the involvement of China in the energy but also infrastructure projects in Montenegro starts as early as 2010 during the government, which was constituted in major part of DPS, and this party still has contacts with China and the officials of the Communist People's Party through various multilateral and bilateral meetings. The most important project here in terms of infrastructure connection is the first part of the highway Bar-Boljare. This arrangement caused a lot of controversy, not only because of the lack of transparency when it comes to this contract, but also the construction process, which was marked by inconsistencies and shortcomings that this drew the attention of the public in Montenegro. NGOs dealing mostly with high-level corruption often saw these omissions as something connected with the former officials in Montenegro. So we come to the issue of transparency. Numerous documents related to the design and construction of the highway are still considered confidential. So the Montenegrin public, the professional or the lay public, still do not have the complete picture of the complexity of the project, not how much it all cost, not what's also important, that this is an agreement between China and Montenegro directly, thus avoiding the national regulations when it comes to public procurement process. Essentially, what you can see in the second bullet here is that Montenegro waived its immunity in its territory, except when it comes to certain categories such as diplomatic and consular missions and military property, with regard to any arbitration procedure in line with the contract. So this is of the greatest concern for the local and the international public, but we'll say a few more words about that later. Essentially, we can see the ratio of debt to GDP, which was 57% in 2012. When we took the loan, it increased to 105% in 2021. So you don't have to be an economic analyst to conclude that definitely this project, or the debt, the loan itself, will affect in the future the finances of Montenegro. Another thing that should be mentioned is that the report of the Center for Global Development as a think tank in Washington, D.C., which did an analysis of all the Chinese projects, or in all the countries included in the Belt and Road Initiative, you can see here that they have mapped the 8 most endangered countries with a Chinese presence in them. So in this case, Montenegro is joined by countries such as Laos, Mongolia, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, the Maldives, and the ones that are most at risk according to that study. Another thing that should have been mentioned much earlier is the impact on the environment, because it's not only an issue in Montenegro. In the past few years, projects that China is supporting in several continents through the Belt and Road Initiative have resulted in displacement of the local population, have affected the ecosystems and the land, the soil. So there is an important study from 2018 produced by Nature Sustainability, which warns that the Chinese project One Belt One Road can result in degradation of the environment. We had the problem with the riverbed of the Tara River in Montenegro, in the basic course in Podgorica adopted the decision that CRBC, as the main contractor, has to pay some 200,000 euro of damages by the year 2024 for the damage caused to the Tara River. We have similar examples in Serbia, but also in the EU member states such as Romania and Hungary, which are also affected by similar issues. So one of the biggest problems of the Chinese projects in Montenegro or in the region or even further out is their impact of those projects on the environment. This should be a particular concern for Montenegro as an ecological state. Of course, the highway is the most important project, but not the only one that China is implementing or should have been implementing in Montenegro. We have companies where they were to produce, we were supposed to buy 4 ships from China, then reconstruction of the thermal power plant in Pljevlja, then involvement of the Chinese companies when it comes to the windmills in Možura, reconstruction of the bridge on the Tara River, Adriatic-Ionian Highway. This was promoted in 2015, but no one knows what happened with that initiative. And then the Kalashnikov's railway reconstruction. These are only loans. And the only place where China donated money is reconstruction of the Tara Bridge. They've donated the money to bring into order, so to say, this important facility in Montenegro that is well known in China because of the popularity of the Yugoslav movie, The Bridge, which is still played in Beijing and throughout China. Another thing that we should be worried about here in Montenegro is that in the past 7 to 8 years there is a strong increase in the share of capital from the countries that are considered authoritarian or hybrid regimes. Although in this period Montenegro proclaimed its pro-Western orientation and was involved in such foreign policy, economic relations with international ones actually were based on cooperation with the countries that do not support such a system of values. In 2006, the share of total investments was 50% from the democratic countries. So there is an obvious drop now in FDIs from the democratic and Western countries until 2021. Specifically with regard to Montenegro, investments in Montenegro in the period until 2019, China invested only 6.5 million euro. However, in 2020, it invested 71 million. So in the year of pandemic, the year of coronavirus. However, according to the report of the Central Bank of Montenegro, data is confidential about these investments, so we were not in the position to see specifically where and how this money was invested and whether it was actually invested. When it comes to foreign trade, apart from Serbia and Germany, Montenegro imports most of the goods from China. According to the data we had last year, we have imported 245 million euro worth of goods, which is 10% of our total imports. When it comes to exports, 40% of exports from Montenegro to China were metals and beverages, and globally looking at the state level, this was 1.3% of total exports. When it comes to tourism, since 2008 and the Olympics days in Beijing, and then later on in 2010, we've been promoting Montenegro as a tourist destination in Beijing. This promotion is eased through the initiative 16+1, where the National Tourist Organization of Montenegro is presented together with the National Tourist Organization of Serbia. The wild soul of Europe is the motto. And although we've been trying to promote Montenegro as a tourist destination for so many years, you can see, according to data here, that Montenegro is mostly the transit zone for Chinese tourists. If you have 1,500 arrivals, only a small number of those who spend the night in the country, this is problematic. So we should see, after 10 years of promotion, why we are still not achieving the desired results.
Also, as for other fields of cooperation, that's education. My colleague mentioned the Confucius Institutes that were criticized by the international community as institutions that practice auto-censorship regarding some sensitive issues, Tiananmen and other Chinese matters and topics that are controversial and opposing, contrary to official position of Beijing. On the other hand, there's the UDG University that cooperates not only with education institutions but also Chinese economic entities. They make it possible for Montenegrin students to travel and learn and work in China. As for cooperation between Montenegro and China in the field of security and technology, it has not taken hold because Montenegro is a NATO member state. And for that reason, there are certain restrictions in place. Huawei is present in Montenegro, but is not involved in the development, in the construction of the 5G network. It's the Sony Ericsson company that is involved in this project. To sum up, the presence of China in Montenegro constitutes a serious issue, not only in Montenegro, but also in various international addresses. So Montenegro, for this reason, has been mentioned in various relevant discussions globally. We could see that the use of Chinese funds could lead us to a situation in which Montenegro is no longer an attractive destination for foreign investors. And we already see some results. We see that that there's been an increase in the share of investments coming from authoritarian and hybrid regimes in Montenegro. As a relatively new NATO member state and relatively weak administrative capacity, Montenegro is a strategic target for the spreading of Chinese influence. So it doesn't come as a surprise that this issue of potential losing of a NATO member state has been raised. There's a study, such as Rodin Group one, suggesting that China in these situations rarely seizes, confiscates property, and they much more frequently write off the debt. So Beijing definitely cares about partners who support the politics of China, such as Montenegro. It could be unrealistic to expect that China, conquers the territory but instead of that, we could have other implications regarding EU membership, and very often when this topic is concerned, the new economic plan of the EU is mentioned for the Western Balkan, 3.2 billion euros worth. It should be a counterweight for the economic Chinese presence in the region. However, one should ask whether such an arrangement or such a plan could actually be a counterweight, and whether it will suffice for Western Balkan countries to refrain from entering into these arrangements with China. And finally, when Montenegro is concerned, that this potential absence of engagement of Western partners at such a crucial time for the democratic development of Montenegro, when We have a war going on in Ukraine that further polarizes already polarized Montenegrin society. It could have negative implications and could result in the strengthening, in a stronger anti-Western narrative in Montenegro. For that, we already have some pretty solid grounds in place. Let me just mention a couple of recommendations that can be found in our study and that are directly related to the conclusions of the study. We believe that stronger and more direct presence of the EU in the territory of not only Montenegro but the entire Western Balkans would be a clear message to all third parties who wish to destabilize the region and who wish to move Montenegro and other countries further away from their foreign policy priorities. So the EU and the US should be more involved in these activities in our region. Also, it's clear that there's this so-called development gap between the Western Balkans and the EU member states. Therefore, it would be desirable for both both the EU and the US could take part in more arrangements, direct investments and economic plans for the development of this region, so that these countries are not forced to enter into risky and dangerous arrangements with third parties. Also, additional support would be needed for the journalists and media to help them strengthen their capacity and resources to investigate these topics. They should be able to conduct thorough and in-depth research into China, because from the monitoring results, it's clear that the largest number of these articles, media articles, were taken from other media sources, and rarely there are very few Montenegrin outlets that write their own articles about China. Of course, the government of Montenegro should be sensitive sufficiently to properly assess foreign capital and to determine whether it's aligned, such capital is aligned with the priorities of Montenegro as the NATO member state and future EU member state. Also, we must mention economic operators who have to commit to strict compliance with the requirements of the EU and Montenegro. Also, regarding political and financial instruments that are provided to Montenegro and the entire region, if the EU and the US provided those, they would be reaffirming their position and they would demonstrate that they are ready to play this geopolitical game for the territory and in the territory of the Balkans. That's all for now. If you have any questions, Marco and I are here to answer those. I believe this was the last slide of my presentation. Thank you.
I just wish to say it's a complex topic and it's hard to elaborate on it through the presentation only. So I encourage all those who are interested in this topic to take the publication, to read it in more detail. We are here today or any other day for any questions or comments. So we appreciate very much the feedback we get also, because we try to incorporate that feedback in our future activities. So anytime is a good time. I'm Nikolina Radonjic. I wish to give a couple of comments first, and then I have a question or two. So, you've mentioned Russia and Ukraine. I think this relationship or connection is just fine, but we didn't mention the other aspect. The Chinese foreign minister mentioned the case of Russia and Ukraine, but in the following context, that Ukraine and Taiwan cannot be seen as the same cases, because Taiwan is an integral part of China and Russia and Ukraine are two independent states, which can lead us to imagine what future developments could be. You also had the case of EU and Croatia and the Pelješac Bridge. Can we mention that as a good example of how cooperation between EU and China should look like? And you've also mentioned that the Western countries are preoccupied with their own issues, and this is the reason why China is increasing its presence in the region. Can we then conclude that had they not been so involved with their own issues, China would not have been present in the construction of this highway? And you've also said that China selected Serbia as one of the strongest countries of former Yugoslavia. Chinese writer Van Gito speaks about that more in the book China Connects the World, where he says that China in principle cooperates with the countries of the region that are strongest in that particular region. That will be all on my side. Okay, with regard to developments in Ukraine, the foreign minister of China has also said that NATO is responsible, that is, that NATO provoked Russia and incited, supposedly, this intervention in Ukraine, although we know it's a brutal aggression. As for Taiwan, definitely this is the focus of attention of China. They see it as their own territory, and I mentioned that this is something that burdens the most, or the relations between the US and China, where this issue will probably be resolved. As for Croatia and the Pelješac Bridge, it is an example of successful cooperation, but we had problems with this project also. There were unregistered workers, that was sanctioned, but we have given this as an example of the Chinese actions, not necessarily negative actions, but an example where China is using its economic supremacy or power to offer faster implementation of projects than the competitors, and cheaper also, sometimes even to its own detriment, but they wish to achieve their geopolitical goals by doing that. And the third question was regarding Serbia. So China definitely chose Serbia as a country that is just Serbia is just like China, trying to stay neutral between the East and the West, not siding with Russia, but not siding with NATO either, essentially still being closer to Russia and the East. So the political influence of Serbia on the surrounding states, such as Montenegro and Macedonia and Republic of Srpska or Bosnia and Herzegovina, is ideal. You know, in this case, Serbia is ideal for them to improve their cooperation, because then cooperation with other countries will be easier to implement. And I don't know if you had another question for me. That was it. Anybody else? If not, I invite you to the brunch. We call it brunch. It's served outside. So maybe we can talk a bit more informally over brunch. So thank you once again. We are open to get your comments and suggestions in the future also. Thank you all.